So we are fortunate enough that we have someone who will give us more clarity on this organization, its principles, and the form of struggle it opts to employ. We would like to welcome Leonie Tanggahma from the Diplomatic Queen of the OPM. Leonie.
Good morning, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, Leonie, we can hear you clear. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Lieutenant General Jeffrey Bomanak, who is the chairman of the Organisasi Papua Merdeka, on behalf of the leadership of the National Liberation of West Papua, Army of West Papua, TPNPB, please allow me to extend our revolutionary greetings. Also allow me to thank warmly our brothers and sisters from the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, the ILPS Asia Pacific, as well as the Merdeka West Papua Global Support Network for giving us this opportunity to talk and to present ourselves as West Papuans. The Organisasi Papua Merdeka, Free Papua Movement, OPM or FPM, is the national liberation organization of the people of West Papua, which originated in the 60s to fight against the illegal Indonesian occupation of West Papua. The OPM recognizes the historical proclamation made on the 1st of July 1971 in Marcas Victoria Liberated Territory as the rejection of the 1969 fraudulent act of no choice, and it upholds this proclamation as the expression of the continuous struggle of the Papuan people. The OPM operates under the 1st of July 1971 Constitution and the OPM Charter of 1977. The OPM, its mission is very simple. It struggles for the unconditional recognition and the respect of the right to self-determination and statehood of the people of West Papua, as guaranteed by the Charter of the United Nations and all the relevant United Nations resolution. In order to understand what was happening at the time the OPM started, we need to go back a bit in history, and it's the history of an unfinished process of decolonization, a history of broken promises, a history of fraud and deceit. It starts on the 1st of December 1961, where the Dutch colonizers recognized our symbols and they recognized them as territorial symbols because we were still a colony of the Dutch. For the first time on that day, on the 1st of December 1961, our flag was hoisted next to the Dutch flag. Our national anthem was played and sung together with the national Dutch anthem, and our country was given the name of Papua Barat, West Papua, and the people were given the name the Papuan people. The Dutch clearly stated that it was not a recognition of independence, but a recognition of a number of symbols. It was forming an embryo of what would become an independent state of West Papua. A little over 2 weeks after that, and that was the only time that the West Papuan flag was allowed to fly in West Papua, Trikora was the call for invasion that was made by the then President Sukarno of Indonesia. Trikora is an abbreviation of the Tri Komando Rakyat, the People's Threefold Command, which was announced by President Sukarno on the 19th of December 1961. And on that day, he called for a total mobilization of the people of Indonesia to destroy what he thought, or he considered, a Dutch promoted Papuan state, to fly the Indonesian flag over the territory of West Papua, and to prepare for war over what he called Irian. For Indonesians, in the Indonesian history, this was basically the so-called liberation of the territory from the Dutch. But for us, West Papuans, it was an illegal military aggression from a country which did not recognize our sovereignty. To us, the speech made by Sukarno was nothing more than a call for a war of aggression military conflict that is fought with no other justification than territorial expansion. The fraud and the deceit continued when in 1962 the New York Agreement was signed between the Dutch and the Indonesians under the watchful eye of the Americans, which basically, this accord basically regulated this transfer of the administration from the Netherlands to the United Nations. This transition lasted from the 1st of October to the 1962 to the 1st of May 1963. Then it was handed over to Indonesia for a period of 6 years. And then after that, the Papuans were supposed to choose freely through a referendum whether they wanted to join Indonesia or become an independent nation. And already at that time, and that is when it started, basically, the Papuans saw that it was slipping away, that they were not going to get to that independence that easily. First of all, because they would be excluded from the New York Agreement in 1962. There was a lot of frustration, a lot of discontent over a lot of violations and ill treatment that were already happening, discrimination and political domination by the Indonesians. And that is why the first uprisings came about. The first one happened on the 26th of July 1965, the Barat uprising under John Buani, followed only 2 days later, and this is actually a very significant day today because it's exactly 55 years that it happened. One of the army battalion was attacked in Arfai under the leadership of Pemena Salom. A little over a month later, the Arfak uprising appeared. People started not agreeing and wanting to fight in order to liberate themselves. These events are regarded as the first significant activities of the Organisasi Papua Merdeka. The Organisasi Papua Merdeka saw its beginnings in terms of armed struggle, and that is what has been the pattern ever since, because the occupation of West Papua is not a tiny one, it is a very violent one. Soon after that came the 1969 Act of No Choice, the so-called Act of No Choice that has been described several times, I think, throughout the webinars. Only 1,025 Papuans voted instead of 800,000 at the time. A complete fraud and a deceit. Again, making sure that the Papuans did not agree to any of this because they were not part of it. Total disappointment after that so-called referendum, where on the 19th of November, the United Nations General Assembly took note of that vote, and but they basically took note of it. They did not actually confirm that they agreed that West Papua was part of Indonesia, which is an interesting point. Nonetheless, the OPM decided to prepare itself, and 2 years later, on the 1st of July 1971, in protest against the failure of the implementation of that vote, that act of free choice, the OPM proclaimed the independence of the Republic of West Papua on the 1st of July 1971. All peoples have the right to self-determination, and by virtue of their rights, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. The West Papuans are basically following the letter of United Nations Resolution 1514, but also the Common Articles one of the covenants on civil and political rights. The proclamation was read out loud by, at the time, Brigadier General Sergio Forum. And also on that same day, the territorial symbol that had been recognized by the Dutch at the time in 1961, 10 years before that, were recognized or were confirmed by the West Papuans as national symbols. The flag, the national anthem, the name, all of it became national symbols. It became the symbols of a country. Soon after that, diplomacy was able to start. After a series of talk during 1974 between representatives of the government, the provisional government, and the president of Senegal, Mr. Senghor, West Papua started receiving the backing of a friend and an ally, Senegal, the Republic of Senegal. The president of Senegal not only invited the West Papuans to open their first information office in Dakar with a guarantee of solid material support for its daily functioning, but he also committed his government to a policy of support to the principle of self-determination of the people of West Papua. The information office was officially opened on the 1st of July 1975 to mark the 4th anniversary of the proclamation of the Republic of West Papua in the liberated territory of Marcas Victoria. 6 months later, in January 76, the office became operational. The office, the activities of the office included the establishing of direct contacts with African states and other friendly countries, as well as mobilizing international opinion through an information campaign. At the time, there was no internet, there was no social media, nothing. So it was quite a task, but it was quite successful. So in Africa, for example, the head of the mission began a tour, and he was able to meet with a number of heads of states and deliver the message of the president at the time, Mr. Sergio Forum. So in this case, we see him talking to the president of Benin at the time, Mr. Goreku, and here of Togo, Mr. Edema. In terms of diplomacy, also, Europe was not neglected, even if it was not a priority. In 1977, an office was opened in Stockholm, in Sweden. And then little by little, when the countries in the Pacific gained their independence, or almost gained their independence, West Papua was also able to get some support from them. It sort of explains how the people in the Pacific have always been with us, although there's been a gap in the memory. So here you see with the first Prime Minister of Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, and also down here with representatives from the Kanaki. So at the time already we knew we were supposed to be one, and Kanaki was also on its way to independence, but it just wasn't happening. They are still not independent. However, none of this diplomacy work would have worked if there had not been an armed struggle. And we see already in 1948, when you read the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a warning is being set to countries, whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. it is basically a recognition that if that is not done, if there is oppression, if there is tyranny, then as a last resort, you do have to defend yourself. Later, you see a year later in the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention that they talk about the basic needs in occupied territories. Here again, occupied territories are recognized as a special type of places where special needs and special rights are to be granted. And then after that, in several resolutions of the United Nations, you see that the right to struggle or to fight for your independence is also recognized. It's also reaffirmed, and it's reiterated several times, and it's redefined by all available means, particularly armed struggle. Now I hope this is going to work. In the words of Kali Kualit himself, who is one of the military commander who passed away in 2009.
Freeport dan pemerintah Indonesia mengatakan terhadap saya sebagai kriminal atau penjahat adalah dengan serius saya katakan bahwa bohong belaka sebenarnya adalah seorang patriot pejuang bangsa Papua yang sejati. Anggap bahwa Freeport dan PRI dengan militernya adalah kriminal, penjahat, pencuri, penindas, pemerkosa, pemusnah, segala hidup, pelanggaran segala hukum.
And today, this is in May 2020, the stance is the same. They will go on fighting until we get to independence. So the diplomacy will go on as long as the military is there. A difference with the past, with the OPM, is that Papua New Guinea, which is a big ally, which used to be a big potential ally, but for which we did not get any reaction in the 60s, 70s, 80s, today are starting to turn around and give their support. The people of Papua New Guinea, their representatives, they're all starting to realize that they have to help us. In Vanuatu, the support will continue. In terms of leadership, in February 2017, a new chairman was elected for the OPM. This happened in Marcus Victoria Liberated Territory through a meeting of a special meeting. And I'd like to leave you with the words again, which resound the same: until independence, the OPM TPN is not going to give up.
Today's event was an open forum to push for political negotiations with Indonesia over West Papua's 57-year fight for independence. It was also a forum to discuss and address a recent conflict in the Central Highlands of West Papua, where alleged chemical weapons were used on a village. OPM Chairman Jeffrey Bomanak says, as long as there is military occupation in that region, the West Papua Liberation Army will continue to fight.
The OPM, TPNPB will continue to resist and fight until the Indonesian colonial power recognize the independence of the Papua nation present the proclamation of the 1st July 1971.
His main message was to the United Nations. Bomanak called for an assessment team to be sent to investigate human rights abuses and the alleged use of chemical weapons.
To use the good offices of the United Nations Secretary General in order to bring the crisis which has been unfolding on the Papuan ancestral land of Tanggahma and Tanggahma since December 2018.
Activist for Free West Papua and Oro Governor Gary Jufa says, well, superpowers preach about freedom, but turn a blind eye on this 57-year conflict. He says the entire region is not free until there is freedom in West Papua.
Every human being has a right to be free. And each and every one of us, as Pacific Islanders, as Melanesians, have a responsibility to demand freedom for our people. The Pacific cannot be free when our people are oppressed and imprisoned on their own land like this.
Stanley Over Jr., National, MTV News.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leonie. That was a very informative presentation, and I took note that you started to present the historical foundations, no, of OPM, and I think it's really common among indigenous peoples that if there's a point in history that we have to contend with, it is the issue of colonization. So in the case of West Papua, starting from Dutch colonization and later on to Indonesian occupation. Truly, all peoples, no, all peoples, all nations have the right to self-determination, and it is for the people, no, as a matter of right, to assert this right. And because of this assertion in the case of West Papua, it has led to several levels of international recognition, such as you have mentioned. It is also very good to know that such diplomacy work of the OPM has also led to formal relations between other organizations and states, no, supporting the struggle because of its justness, not simply because of the shared history and identity as Melanesians. Also, of course, you gave a very good point that people in the case of oppression or exploitation have the right to rebel or take up arms, no, to free themselves from this oppression and liberation. So thank you very much, Leonie, for that. We'd like to inform our participants that, of course, this will not be the first of our webinar or activities that we will be holding to give us a better understanding of the situation and struggles of the peoples of West Papua. But before we proceed to the question and answer, the open forum portion, let us hear a solidarity message from the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, the NDFP. The NDFP is a revolutionary united front organization of the Filipino people fighting for national freedom and for the democratic rights of the people. So since 1992, also the NDF has been engaged in peace negotiations with the government, but unfortunately, this has stopped under the current Duterte regime. And they have also been engaged in various levels and forms of diplomacy work. I would like to call on Comrade Aaron to read the NDFP message.
Message of solidarity to the West Papua National Liberation Struggle. The National Democratic Front of the Philippines, NDFP, conveys revolutionary greetings of solidarity to the struggling people of West Papua and their national liberation movement. The Philippine Revolutionary Movement stands for the emancipation of all oppressed peoples of the world in line with the principle of internationalism. The COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the irreconcilable contradictions between the oppressed and oppressing classes all over the world, including between the people of West Papua and the oppressive and racist state of Indonesia. The dominant capitalist system has exposed itself incapable of providing for humankind with neoliberal policies that deprive people of the most basic necessities to live while concentrating all of the world's resources at the hands of a few. The ordinary people bear the brunt of the crisis, even more so those living under conflict and occupation as in West Papua. West Papua's state of occupation is also a product of imperialist insatiable demand for resources, as its mountains are ravaged for gold and its lands for gas and palm oil. The illusion of development under Indonesian occupation has long been shattered, as West Papuans continue to suffer from outright neglect from the government and direct attacks from state security forces. This is seen in the West Papuan People's United Voice in the rejection of the Special Autonomy Law, which not only failed to uphold self-determination in any aspect, but also worsened exploitation of the land and people by both local elite and foreign powers. Indonesia's fascist military rule has exacerbated in the last few years with the support of the same imperialist powers benefiting from the plunder of West Papua. Narratives of separatism and terrorism have been developed by Indonesia to confuse and divide the people and to divert the attention from the capitalist roots of the people's suffering. We give our high salute to the militant struggle of West Papuan activists on the ground, as well as the exiles who have likewise played a key role in gaining international attention and support for the West Papuan struggle. We give due recognition to the legitimacy and necessity of the armed struggle being waged by the freedom fighters who have taken on the most militant form of struggle in the defense of their homeland. We also salute comrades in Indonesia and around the world who have been consistent allies of West Papuans in making the struggle seen and heard nationally and internationally. We look forward to the rise of the morning star when the people of West Papua rightfully claim justice and genuine liberation for their nation. May the revolutionary struggles of the Filipino and West Papuan peoples against national oppression and imperialism provide lessons and inspiration to the global struggle against imperialism, and may we stand side by side as we march towards a future free from all forms of oppression. Papua Merdeka, long live West Papua's struggle for national liberation, long live international solidarity. Signed, Luis Halandoni, Chief International Representative, Member, National Executive Committee, National Democratic Front of the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Comrade Aaron, for reading the solidarity message from the National Democratic Front. Thank you very much, Comrade Louis Halandoni, for that message. Now we proceed to the open forum, the question and answer. Several questions have already been posted, and several questions also have been forwarded to us during the registration for this webinar. So I think we'll be able to take 2 or 3 rounds of questions for each of our panelists, our speakers. For Jacob, our first speaker, there's one question here. in relation to your international work, no, with the Pacific Islands Forum, the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and you mentioned also relations with the African Caribbean Pacific group. In this time of pandemic, how do you think this will develop further, since the Indonesian government will most likely do all what it can, no, to stop, to delay this campaign, or even to delay any move to have any form of international human rights visit or investigation in West Papua? Okay.
Thank you, definitely. This is a very interesting question to UNLP, but also to Papuans peoples. We believe that nothing, can stop our movement. UNWP still work very closely with Vanuatu state country as a legal independent country member of UN as our special sponsor to international arena. We still continue work closely with Vanuatu government by carrying people voice from West Papua, backed up by all documents like photo, video, petition, statement, and so on to Vanuatu government. And by our sponsor, they will continue transferred to international institution like MSG, Pacific Island Forum, Africa, Caribbean, Commonwealth country, European, and also Vanuatu representative in all independent country member of UN around the world. So that's indirect work we UNWP ongoing do. Also, we still continue with the we use WhatsApp or Skype to talk with our sponsor country, a member of UN, and some of African states. And that's the work we work until today. Also, our member of UNWP based in outside, but basically our leader is the people of West Papua, because we also consult with 33 people power, or we call tactics organization inside. And also we work closely with our all supporter from Indonesia and international, because we believe that the three actors is very, very key, important to bring independent movement of West Papua, is the people of West Papua themselves, Indonesian people, and internationally. So we should work very harmonious between West Papua and West Papua, West Papua and Indonesia, and West Papua with international. So this principle and a basic strategy we work for. It's also have a positive impact to West Papua. This COVID, allowed Papuan to not depend by, international capitalism. It's also create how West Papua should back, and they stand and they depend by their own land, because the land is rich. And when they are back or going back to live in life based on what they have in West Papua, and we will cut all things we depend by, of foreign, or we call power capitalists around the world. So we look this in the positive impact. COVID also give us very positively, but negatively is difficult for we move around the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. I think you mentioned a very important part of building unity, between among the peoples of West Papua and among the peoples and between the peoples of West Papua and Indonesia, and of course the international support that West Papua can gather for its fight for liberation and independence. So thank you very much. Later on, I'll be asking a common question to all our panelists. For Kaka Leonie, you mentioned something about the relations, no, and support specifically with Papua New Guinea, and I think this is a very interesting development in the struggle for West Papua independence, since you share really a very common history, and at one point in time, this was one territory. Can you further elaborate on this relationship? And maybe can you also, citing this as an example, can you elaborate further on how does diplomacy work and armed struggle go hand in hand in the case of OPM?
Yes. Thank you very much for the question. Papua New Guinea, indeed, it's the brothers and sisters on the other side. For a long time, because of outside influence, because they had just become independent, perhaps as well, because of the influence of Australia, I suppose, it was not possible for them to give us the official support that was necessary, or the official recognition. What they did do, because they look like us, because they sound like us, because they are us, they were able to welcome us in their land. The refugees that had to flee from West Papua all this time were always welcomed with open arms. So between the 80s and the 90s, we did not really get any reaction from them in terms of recognition. It was always very much the government of Papua New Guinea trying to stay friendly with Indonesia and not wanting to risk their relationship with the big neighbor. But also the influence of Australia and other countries that might have done the trick. But today it is getting more and more obvious to them that they need to support us, also with the changes in government. Prime Minister O'Neill, before the one from today, was also very clear that he wanted something to be done in terms of relationships with West Papua. And now with Prime Minister Marape as well, it's all a matter also of lobbying. And today with the chairman of the OPM also having a base in Papua New Guinea, it makes a big difference as well. He's able to speak to parliamentarians there practically on a weekly basis to brief them on the situation. And truly, and this joins basically the question you were asking about the armed struggle. It does coincide. People in governments and parliamentarians are curious about how we are able to manage. So it is linked. They do want to know if whether or not we are fighting for it, and if we are actually fighting for it, if we need help, if we need in some way any type of support. And that is what the OPM is asking for, basically, this recognition by the countries of, on the one hand, the struggle of the people of West Papua for the right to self-determination and independence, but on the other, help in terms of material help, but also, and it's a very, I would say, real politics. It's if we need to fight, we need the material for it. And governments are interested in that, and that is part of the political lobby that takes place once they know and they respect the fact that we have a very strong civil society with NGOs that are capable of, throughout the years, lobbying, for example, the United Nations Human Rights Council, in order to make sure that the actual High Commissioner is invited by Indonesia. That was all the work of the civil society. And in that area, we do need the civil society, and they are performing very, very well. The last time they also did a lot of reports for the UPR processes, where the Universal Periodic Report, where Indonesia had to report. The West Papuan NGOs were there to say, here we are, but this is our side of the story. It does not look good at all. And that is why at the time the High Commissioner wanted to go to West Papua. There's a new High Commissioner since 2018. She wants to go to West Papua, it's not working. But they understand as well that there is a situation happening. We call it an occupation. They know it's a crisis situation. They care about the civilians. We also care about the civilians. So it's all linked. So there's an understanding on where we stand. We state, we confirm every time there is a war happening, casualties will fall, and people who are identified as part of the security force, part of the enemy, should make sure they are not there. So that's part of the answer. The West Papuan is seeking a recognition of, on the one hand, the 1st of July proclamation of independence, and on the other, to all those states and governments who are out there, for the moral and whatever material assistance they can provide for the West Papuans.
Okay, thank you, Leonie. I think you mentioned in part that these Pacific Island states, and of course, with now the developed relations with Papua New Guinea, has also not only recognized the legitimacy of the struggle for self-determination and independence in West Papua, but also in a way giving a recognition as of the belligerent status of OPM in this struggle for independence. So thank you very much. Now, there's a common question for all of our panelists, because we mentioned earlier, I mean, all of you mentioned really the relations with the peoples of Indonesia. How important is it that we get the support of the peoples of Indonesia with the struggle of West Papua's self-determination and independence? And if we do have this kind of support, how strong is the Indonesian people's solidarity for West Papua? Maybe we can start with Victor, then Jacob, then we'll have Leonie.
Thank you very much. I think today our focus in West Papua is to enlighten and educate people of Indonesia to support us in West Papua with the distressing issue in West Papua. For example, for the special autonomy in West Papua. So they can know, firstly, that special autonomy is not a form of the right of self-determination, but an attempt to eliminate the right of self-determination for the people of West Papua. Because I think the Indonesian people also knows by themselves that, especially in West Papua also, that our strong legal argument that prove that illegality of Indonesia in West Papua. The second is special autonomy is not a form of Indonesian goodness for West Papuans, but it is an agenda of occupation of colonialism and capitalism and militarism in West Papua. Proving that West Papua, according to statistical, I think Indonesian statistic, is still the poorest region in Indonesia. This needs to know by Indonesian people. The other one is the population of West Papuan is only 2.5, and our neighbors who say the same size of New Guinea have reached, Papua New Guinea is reached 8.3 million.
Mhm.
There are 2,040 mining companies in West Papua today, 80 illegal logging companies in Papua. So all operation proves that the genocide, ethnocide, ecocide are happening continuously in West Papua today. So I think not only Indonesia, but it's time for world solidarity to work together against oppression, because imperialism and capitalism, which gave birth to colonialism of Indonesia in West Papua, are the common enemies of all West Papua, all people around the world.
Mhm.
So KMPP strongly believe in the power of the people of West Papua today in West Papua. So West Papua unity and solidarity of the people of the world will win. So in the COVID-19 period, in this condition, we also campaign so that the people of West Papua revive a culture of gardening that had existed before our ancestors. So we say that gardening is building our Papuan nationality and national liberation in West Papua. We also continue to convey to the people that this is time for the people of West Papua to refuse to submit to the authorities of Indonesia, to disobedience under Indonesian power. So we call for unity not only in West Papua, but from the Indonesian struggle to Indonesian organization struggles, Indonesian people. We submit that our enemy is oppression, not the oppressed people of Indonesia from the different races. We are not fighting for our racist sentiment in West Papua. So we are also build solidarity with Indonesia today. We have Indonesian people fronts. We also convey to the people to see the hegemony of Indonesian development, because it is a colonial hegemony, not only in West Papuan people, to West Papuan people, but for in Indonesian people too. So we also encourage the unity of the people and unity of the struggle between all the struggle organizations around the world. So I think for the solidarity, we believe in the power of the people. We need solidarity from the people and people around the world, not only in Indonesia. We need solidarity and our comrades around the world to continue to explain the war, not in Indonesia and the world community, that Papua is a real example of operation of capitalism and imperialism.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. How about you, Jacob? Jacob? Jacob?
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. Briefly, and also what the Victor already mentioned is it's very clear that solidarity is we need people and people and people to people.
Mhm.
So I can't repeat again, but I would like to tell that the success of the people from all nations on the world is not stand by other people. So we work closely with Indonesia is not because Indonesia is enemy.
Mhm.
Indonesia is not our enemy, but Indonesian state's policy is the wrong. We must stop it. So we also need Indonesia, and when the old Indonesian, they already ongoing wrong. And we believe that the young generation today and future, they will make sure that they stand on the right constitution based on the preamble constitution of Indonesia 1945, mentioned that independence is the right of all of nations on the world. So they stand with West Papua is not because they're against the government, but also that's what part of how they stand to help the own, dignity, sovereignty, and liberty. So we work closely with them because Indonesia and those nations close with us, they are our good neighbor. We should stand together to build the future together as the better place, justice and peace place full of love. So this is not only help West Papua to independent, but we also must stand and we set up something will coming best to the world. And of course, it must come from ourselves. So we West Papua, we are close neighbor with our friends from Indonesia, also the Pacific country and the world. Asia, Pacific, Africa, Caribbean, America, Middle East. So we start from our own place, West Papua, and our neighbors, Indonesia, other Pacific country. And then it will going to the world because we are big family of the world, have big responsible to run very high mission of the United Nations is to save the world, better place, peaceful, peace place, justice place, full of love. And we must respect our each other. So I can't explain too much because my brother Victor already explains very clear. That's today we stand very close with our own people, must organize our people unite, our leader unites, our agenda must unite, and we work closely with Indonesia and the international because our one main is we want to our own people must safe and freedom. And of course, it will become blessed to the world. And this big mission will going for. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Leonie?
Yes, the solidarity from the people of Indonesia is crucial in this struggle. Having them understand what this is about is also crucial, but also identifying what we have in common or the goals that we might have in common, the objectives. One of the things that the students were able to identify was a law that is being debated in Parliament, the Omnibus Law, which is basically for the Indonesian workers, it means less rights for them. And for West Papua, that same Omnibus Law means easier access to foreign companies in West Papua. So identifying goals so that you can actually join without completely joining, because the angle is not the same, but understanding that the enemy is not each other, but these regimes that come in and basically destroy our rights and our livelihood. That's the main thing about the solidarity from Indonesians. But there is also, in terms of the OPM, a kind of solidarity that was identified very early when they wrote the Constitution of the 1st of July 1971. It's the solidarity that all those Indonesians that have already moved in West Papua and who feel Papuans, they need to feel that they can contribute to the struggle. Not so long ago, during another webinar, somebody asked, what if, what's going to happen after independence? Are you going to chase me away? The thing is, it's basically guaranteed in our constitution of the 1st of July 1971 that if you show your commitment towards West Papua, that you can and that you should stay in West Papua as a West Papuan. So there is this a lot to think about, a lot to talk about in terms of being together with the Indonesians without being part of the Republic of Indonesia, because it's been almost 60 years now. A lot of Indonesians have come, a lot of Indonesians were born in West Papua. A lot of them feel West Papuan, and a lot of them love West Papua. So it's something that luckily our seniors thought about. It's something that organizations such as the JDP, which is the Papua Peace Network, also thought about when they started getting people to talk to each other. A lot of Indonesians are part of that Papuan Peace Network because they feel they can contribute. So as long as we assure them that there are ways to contribute, but also, I wouldn't say guarantees, but still clauses that they can call upon once West Papua is independent. So we need their understanding of the matter so that they can also help not only to make West Papua free, but also to make Indonesia for themselves a better place, a more democratic place. So the struggle is something that we have in common. The goals might be different, the facet net might be different, but out there we're all humans. So I think that's what I can add to what Victor and Jacob have already said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're actually running out of time. We're working overtime, but I think the three of you mentioned a very important point, no? That we really need to identify the real enemy in the struggle. And in this case, all of you mentioned that the peoples of Indonesia are not the enemy because they themselves, especially the working class, the workers, the farmers, the peasants, the students, are also victims of exploitation and oppression by the Indonesian state. And this is also led by the ruling classes of Indonesia. So you also mentioned that I think it's also important that we study the different classes that operate in West Papua, and maybe from that study, we will be able to build wider and stronger unity between the peoples of West Papua and Indonesia. I would like to take also note that Ka Victor mentioned that in West Papua alone, or in Indonesia alone, how many thousands of mining companies do we have? How many logging companies do we have? How many agricultural commercial plantations do we have? But this does not benefit the majority of the Indonesian people. This does not benefit West Papua and the other provinces of Indonesia. And this has not contributed to the development or industrialization of Indonesia as a whole. So I think guided by the principles of international solidarity, we will be able to forge this kind of unity between all the oppressed and exploited peoples of West Papua and Indonesia. So we have seen, thank you very much to our participants. We have seen from the presentations of our speakers, Ka Jacob, Ka Victor, and Ka Leonie, that there are various ways and forms of asserting self-determination. Each would play a very important role in achieving the right to self-determination and liberation of the peoples of West Papua. And one thing is also clear, that the peoples of West Papua will not be able to achieve this if we are not also able to give the necessary international support and solidarity to our struggles. So probably the challenge to all of us here today is, how do we move forward? How do we strengthen this solidarity work and how do we coordinate our efforts in a better and sustained efforts. And I think the co-organizers of this webinar, together with the organizations of in West Papua, are committed to do this. And of course, let us not forget that at the heart of the struggle for self-determination and liberation in West Papua are the peoples of West Papua. So we're run out of time. Thank you very much. But before we go, we would like to invite you, if you haven't seen the webinar 1 and 2, you can view this in YouTube and in Facebook. You can see on the screen how you can access this. And then, of course, we would like to invite everybody to join us on July 31 for our cultural program to cap the Solidarity Month for West Papua self-determination and liberation. Again, in behalf of the International League of People's Struggles Asia Pacific, the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, and the Merdeka Global Support Network, we would like to thank our speakers, Ka Jacob, Ka Victor, and Ka Leonie, and to all our participants for joining us today. We hope to see you on July 31st and in the other activities that we will be organizing for Papua Merdeka. So, terima kasih, Papua Merdeka.